right, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. If you're joining us for the first time on YouTube, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And over the last month and a half, we have done just that. We've been to the jungles of Indonesia, we've been up to the Arctic for epic hikes, East Africa for some of their amazing animals, and more, all bringing you amazing conservation stories and people from across the globe. And today is no different. We're really excited to be joined again by basically the entire team at the Royal BC Museum. So the Royal BC Museum, we've done a slew of programs with them over the last year. They're one of the elite research institutions, repositories of amazing things in all of Canada, located on probably the most beautiful place in the whole country, beautiful Vancouver Island. So I'm really excited to dive in on this International Mountain Day to explore with some of their top research all about mountain biodiversity in all its forms all across the province of BC. So I'm going to kick us off by turning over to Kim. She's going to dive in with a presentation. We're going to go one by one through a slew of incredible people and take your questions at the end. I can't wait, and I'm sure you can't either. Kim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thank you, Jesse. Hi, everybody. My name's Kim Goff. I'm a learning program developer at the Royal BC Museum, and I'm going to show you a little introduction here, and we will get rolling right away. And I'm just going to make that swapped. Great. I hope you are now seeing a lovely blue screen on your slide. So, hello and welcome to the Royal BC Museum. I'd like to we're so happy to be here. The Royal BC Museum features both human history and natural history collections and exhibits. We are located on the traditional territories of the Kwungan-speaking people, and we extend our appreciation for the opportunity to live and learn on this territory. For those of you who are watching from across the country or internationally, the Royal BC Museum is located in Victoria, British Columbia, on the west coast of Canada. With 10 major mountain ranges spanning our province, 75% of British Columbia is mountainous. These dots are just some of the places we will take you to today. Starting in the top left of your screen, you see a little red dot by the B. That is the area of Level Mountain. And if you go clockwise, you see the next dot by the R. That's the Spatisi Plateau in the northwest. Keep going around and you see Graham Laurier Provincial Park in the northeast. And perhaps surprisingly, you'll see a red dot off the coast. That red dot is a seamount on the southwest of Vancouver Island in the Pacific Ocean. Your presenters today represent a range of our natural history staff at the Royal BC Museum. First, Dr. Ken Marr, Curator of Botany, will talk about plants, followed by Curator of Paleontology, Dr. Victoria Arbour, who will share dinosaur discoveries. Claudia Copley is a collections manager and researcher who studies entomology, and she's going to talk about insects and spiders. And we'll wrap up with Heidi Gartner, a researcher and our invertebrate zoology collection manager, who is presenting with a virtual Dr. Cherise Dupre, head scientist for deep sea ecology at Fisheries and Oceans Canada. And they're going to talk about underwater mountains and the animals without backbones that live there. So let's jump into it. And we're going to go over to Ken.
Good afternoon. It's good to be with everyone. I'm going to be talking about this landscape and the plants that live there. I'm going to cover about 4 topics fairly quickly. First of all, I'm going to talk about how we do our work to document the plant life in the alpine of the mountains of British Columbia. Here's a view from the north. Then I'll talk about 2 stories involving plant distributions and DNA analysis, and then I'll finish with a fake flower. So the alpine, simply stated, is the land above the trees. And if you can see my cursor here, I'm showing a line here, and above that line you can see there is no forest. That line is determined by temperature. It's not determined by altitude or latitude. It's a temperature above which it's too cold for trees to grow. And as Kim mentioned earlier, much of the province is covered by mountains. The alpine area, the land above the trees, occupies about 12% of the landscape. And given that globally that's only 3%, we have a significant proportion of the world's alpine territory. So the plants in British Columbia alpine are poorly documented. It's a vast area. This map here shows the 3 different alpine regions that have been undertaken as defined by an analysis by Will Mackenzie at the Ministry of Forests. And the mountains are diverse, they're difficult to reach, and it's expensive to reach. So that's why they're poorly documented. The dots you see there on the map represent the collections we had made up until 2016, and we've been to an additional 12 or 15 mountains. So we've collected lots and lots of specimens. They are available for further study. We have documented the existence of at least 400 species in that landscape that looks so barren from a distance. And we've collected thousands of samples for DNA analysis. This is how we do our work. We set up camp. We stay 2 or 3 days. It would be nice to stay longer, but we're trying to cover a lot of ground. Everyone has their own tent, as shown on the left. And then on the right is these shelters we use. We use one for cooking to keep the food away from our tents. There are bears in the alpine. And we use the other tent, the other shelter, for workspace, or pinning insects or pressing plants. And there's our portable plant dryer there. Here's what a typical day looks like. We're trying to cover as much ground as possible. The dotted line represents a track that I took a few years ago in Graham-Laurier Provincial Park. And you can see, if you look, you'll see different shades of green, and that's very intentional. I'm covering the ground. I'm trying to go to all the different habitats, and the different shades of green represent actually different vegetation. The importance of covering as much ground as possible lies in the fact that some of those plants only occur in 1 or 2 places on that whole mountain massif. So it's important to spend as much time as possible just simply hiking and stopping at each location and making collections of anything that hasn't been collected yet. So we're trying to make a collection of a sample of every single species on that landscape. In the center there is what the specimens look like when they come back here to the collection, to the herbarium. They've been pressed and mounted with tape and glue onto acid-free paper. The lower right-hand corner is a label that has all the information associated with the collection. And the cabinet on the right is where the specimens are stored. These are incredibly important specimens for documenting the biodiversity of British Columbia. The data that's associated with them is available globally. The specimens document species distributions, and people who work in classification and taxonomy use specimens for classification purposes. And more we get requests to remove tissue for DNA analysis. So I referred to one study that I'm going to highlight a little bit here is this strange distribution, puzzling distribution, in a little plant called ice grass. You can see how tiny it is. It grows in the gravels below melting snow beds. That's a pretty ubiquitous habitat in mountains. And the dots that you see there, the red dots, are our own collections. And then as you go way further south into the US, you see that it occurs there in the US as well, but it's absent from southern British Columbia. And distributions like this are puzzling and have interesting stories typically. But what makes this one a little more interesting is that at least 12 species have a similar pattern. And when you see that kind of assemblage, you start to have to imagine that it's not random chance, that there is some reason about the history of the landscape that would cause those plants to occur in that pattern of distribution. So all of these species occur from northern BC to the Arctic. They occur east of Yellowstone Park, and they occur in northern Colorado. But in between, it's absent, even though there is abundant alpine habitat. So here's what I imagine might have happened. This is a view from Alaska of what the landscape maybe have looked like all over Western North America during the Pleistocene, during a cold period when there was no forest, as you can see in this image, and tundra plants that are adapted to cold environments but without trees were able to spread all over the Western United States. And later, as the climate warmed at low elevations, the habitat became too dry and hot for tundra plants, and the slopes became forested. So currently, the only tundra remaining is on the mountaintops. So there's still some questions. Okay, this is supposed to show a map. Where that question mark is supposed to be a map. So as you saw earlier, the southern British Columbia populations are missing. There's no plants there. And so one question would be, is it extirpated because glaciation was more recent or more extensive? And then turning again to the northern British Columbia populations, did they arrive after the ice melted, or did they persist during the last ice advance? So the current thinking is that ice covered all of British Columbia, all of Canada around 18,000 years ago. And this gives us an opportunity to apply what's called the scientific method, which is testing a hypothesis and collecting data, and then reformulating further hypotheses. So a hypothesis here would be that after the Ice Age, plants came into British Columbia from ice-free areas in the north and from ice-free areas in the south. And we can test this hypothesis using DNA markers of plants that are living now. So we chose this widespread Arctic and alpine plant, a very hardy plant called mountain sorrel. If you ever see it in the mountains, have a nibble. It is very tart. It would make a very nice salad green. And as we've studied this plant, we've discovered that there's many different genetic types. So that within that species, they all look identical. But there's different genetic types, just as within the human populations, we have different blood groups. So the next question, having identified the existence of all of these genetic types, the next question is, well, how are those genetic types distributed, and what might that tell us about the migration of this species? So we're thinking about how was this plant distributed in Western North America? So shown here are 3 maps. Ignore the colors and ignore the shapes of the dots. And these are 3 different genetic types and how they're distributed on the landscape. So type A, you can see occurs in the north, and it's easy to imagine that those plants spread into northern British Columbia after the last ice age. And type E occurs, we're now looking at the middle, occurs in the south of the ice, where the ice once was, and extending well into northern British Columbia. And so that you can imagine those populations established from plants coming from the south. But what was kind of surprising is that there's a large number of populations that have plants that did not come from the north or from the south. And so this would challenge the dogma that all of the province was covered by ice during the last ice advance. We're pretty sure that these plants persisted during the last ice advance in areas that were ice-free rather than covered by ice. We don't think they came from the north or the south after the last ice age. So I'm going to close with this interesting anecdote. One sees lots of things on the landscape as you're hiking around, and on this plant here normally has white flowers, and the fake flower is in the lower right-hand corner, and that's caused by a fungal infection that is transported by insects, and the insects are transporting the fungus from one plant to another because it looks like a flower. And so not only does the plant produce this structure that looks like a flower, it actually even produces nectar to attract insects. So I'm going to wrap up there, and I believe there will be time for questions later on. Thank you very much.
There certainly will, and thank you so much, Ken. That was great. Again, anytime we get to highlight how important glaciers played in sort of Canada's landscapes and shaping all of what Canada is, it's an incredible opportunity. I also love that your presentation had a big question mark where a map should be. I think a lot of exploration starts with that sort of thing, so I appreciate that happening by accident, even if it was fortuitous. So yeah, Ken, let's keep the front roll going, and we're going to take questions for you a little bit later in the presentation. I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Victoria Arbour. Come on in and go for it. Take us away.
Hi, everyone. Thanks. Let me get my presentation up here. Bear with me while I share my screen. I'm going to share screen.
That's the mountain screen sharing song, is the do, by the way.
Do song, right? So I'm just having a little tiny trouble sharing my screen really quickly. Let me give it one more try here.
One more try, and then I can bring it up for you if anything's going wrong.
Okay, let's just see. Sorry, folks.
Thank you, Tom.
Here. Yeah, you know what? It's not letting me bring up my PowerPoint. So if you don't mind sharing for me.
Absolutely. I'll get that up to you and you can dive right in.
And I'll tell you when to ping slides for me.
Sorry about that. Give me 2 quick seconds for you. Yeah, everyone's screwing up. That's half the fun of video calls nowadays. There has to be some things that go wrong. Otherwise, it's no fun. There we go. We should. Oh, it literally keeps bringing up the wrong presentations. It's making no sense at all.
It looks like the right one to me.
Did it? Perfect. Yep. There we go. Lovely. Take us away.
All right. Thanks, Jesse. Yeah. So thanks, everyone. today I'm going to be talking not about things that we find on mountains today, but on the things that lived in British Columbia back millions of years ago that we find their fossils up on mountains today. So that's been a lot of fun. So Jesse, if you can go to the next slide for me. My interest in British Columbia dinosaurs and in mountain dinosaurs actually started a long time ago as an undergrad with a project I started after a person donated some dinosaur fossils to Dalhousie University on the other side of the country when I was an undergraduate there. So this geologist had been working in northern British Columbia and had found some dinosaur bones in the 1970s along the Sustut River, which is north of Smithers, British Columbia. And after a long time of studying these bones, I and my colleague David Evans at the Royal Ontario Museum realized that this was a new type of dinosaur that we named Ferrosaurus sustutensis just about a year ago, last November. This actually became British Columbia's first unique dinosaur species, which was super exciting. And it's a very weird kind of dinosaur to have found by accident. If I just randomly found a dinosaur bone out walking around, I might expect it to be from like a duck-billed dinosaur or maybe a horned dinosaur. This is a weird kind of dinosaur called a leptoceratopsid. So it's like a small cousin of Triceratops without the big horns on its face. It's about the size of a sheep. So Ferrosaurus is this really neat discovery. We don't have a lot of dinosaur bones in British Columbia compared to places like Alberta, but this really shows that there could be more in the province. So that got me really interested in it. So can you ping to the next slide, please? Thank you. So Ferrosaurus was found in a place on the Sustut River, but in a sort of a geological region of British Columbia that we call the Sustut Basin. And that basically just refers to the rocks that are on the surface of the ground in that area. And it forms this kind of funny, like skinny crescent across the northern part of British Columbia. So that's what the green is showing there. So along the Sustut River, the rocks were deposited by ancient lakes and rivers, rivers flowing down from these newly rising mountains on either side of a little valley about 67 to 68 million years ago. So that's in the southern part of the Sustut Basin. But you can see the Sustut Basin is a huge place in British Columbia with a lot of good potential for having more dinosaur fossils. So if we can go to the next slide, I'm going to talk about my search for more of Ferrosaurus's skeleton along the Sustut River. I went back there in 2017. So this isn't up in the mountains, but it's in one of these mountain valleys in northern British Columbia. And it's a really beautiful place, but it is a very hard place to look for dinosaur fossils. Most paleontologists like to look for dinosaur fossils in like deserts or badlands where there's no trees to get in the way, and you can just hike all over the rocks and look for dinosaur fossils. But that's not always what you get. Sometimes the rocks are in places with lots of trees and streams, and it's very hard to find fossils. And that was what was true for the Sustut River. So we did end up finding some fossils. We didn't find more of Ferrosaurus, but we found part of a fossil turtle and fossil leaves. So that was fun, but a little bit disappointing we didn't get more dinosaur fossils. So I thought that might sort of be it for exploring the Sustut Basin. Until, if we go to the next slide, I moved to Victoria to become curator at the Royal BC Museum in 2018, and I met Ken, who we just heard from, and he told me about an expedition that had happened in the northern part of the Sustut Basin back in 2013, one of these trips where he was looking for alpine plants. And Ken has a very good eye because he spotted this very weird little pebble, which actually is a tooth from a dinosaur from the northern Sustut Basin. So even though it's missing the tip of the tooth, this would have been a little sharp, triangular, pointy tooth from probably a tyrannosaur-like T-Rex, which is pretty neat. And where you can find one dinosaur tooth or one dinosaur bone, there's a pretty good chance you might find some more. So I was really excited about this and knew that I wanted to get back up there and really spend some time looking for more dinosaur fossils. And if we can go to the next slide, you'll see why I was very excited. So this is much better dinosaur hunting territory than the Sustut River. Both places are very beautiful, but this one has no trees. So we're up above the tree line, that concept that Ken was talking about in the last presentation. So there is a little bit of grass, there's vegetation, but there's also way more rocks exposed at the surface. And so this is in an area called Spatsizi Plateau Wilderness Provincial Park. The closest town in British Columbia is called Dease Lake, but that's still about an hour helicopter ride away from where we were. So it's very, very remote, pretty far north, and not very easy to get to. We spent about 4 or 5 days hiking around at one spot where that dinosaur tooth had come from, and we weren't really finding a whole lot. So we decided to move to another little plateau about another half hour away, and set up our camp. And that's what we're looking at here on this second plateau. And it was a beautiful day. We were really excited. And we were like, let's hike along that back cliff that you can see in the back part of this picture. So we go to the next slide, we'll see a close-up of what that hill looks like. So this is much better. Geologists love rocks, and so do paleontologists. So when I see a nice cliff like this, that looks like it's going to be a lot of fun to explore. So those two of my friends are walking in the middle of that picture, Thomas Cullen and Jacqueline Richmond, my crewmates on the expedition. And this was really great. So it's a very treacherous hill, so we had to be very careful walking around it. But within about an hour, we had started to find dinosaur bones. So we were really, really excited. We had a wonderful afternoon. The picture on the right is showing a very weathered, eroded dinosaur rib. So you can sort of see the outline in it, and some of the white stuff in there is the leftover bone. That's from a pretty big dinosaur, probably something like a duckbill dinosaur or a horned dinosaur. We found little pieces and fragments, and we collected some small pieces. And we're really looking forward to collecting some more over the next like 4 or 5 days that we were there. But Mother Nature had some other plans for us, which we will see on the next slide. So even though we were visiting, even though we were visiting British Columbia on, oh no, is there a video playing here? We might need to click the slide so that the video plays.
Yeah.
All right, well, we'll just roll with it.
We can probably do this. It's just when I click the slide, it takes me out of the screen share. Let's see
if it will work.
It wants to work. It's thinking about it, Victoria.
It's thinking about it.
Really?
Okay, too bad. You know what?
It snows snowy in August and it ruined the slide.
That's true. It just completely ruined it. So if you can picture a beautiful snowy version of that first picture with our tents covered in snow, that was what we woke up to the next day. So we had a great day hiking around. It started to rain. And then it got a little bit chilly and it snowed for a whole day and a half on us, which was really too bad. So by the time we've had a bunch of snow fall on us, we couldn't really go look for more dinosaur fossils because it's too hard to find them when there's a bunch of snow on the ground. And that hill would have been too dangerous to walk around. So that was pretty much the end of that expedition. Right as we started to find really good things, we had to leave and get the helicopter to come pick us up and rescue us so that we didn't, get too chilly up there on the Spatsizi Plateau. So that's okay. We were going to go back last summer, obviously, because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We had to cancel a lot of plans. So I'm really looking forward to getting back there in the near future and continuing our search. What I think is really cool is that even though there have only been a couple of days spent at a couple of these different sites in the Sustut Basin, we're already starting to find information about the dinosaurs that lived there 67 million years ago. So we know that we've got Ferrosaurus, this unique species from the Sustut River, as well as turtles and plants. On the Spatsizi Plateau, we've got a tyrannosaur of some kind, some big herbivorous dinosaurs, maybe a small meat-eating dinosaur, and maybe a crocodile. And that's with just a couple of days of work. So I'm really excited to get back there and really flesh out what kind of dinosaurs lived in this region many millions of years ago. So why is the Sustut Basin cool? Let's go to our final slide here. So the really neat thing about the Sustut Basin is that it's an area that hasn't really been explored before. And that's always really fun. But there's something even cooler about the Sustut Basin. The rocks that were laid down in the Sustut Basin are about the same age as ones exactly on the other side of the mountains in places like Montana and Alberta and South Dakota, where we get classic dinosaurs like T-Rex and Triceratops and Ankylosaurus, super famous dinosaurs. Those rocks have been really well explored. So we've got a pretty good idea of what the ecosystem looked like when Tyrannosaurus and Triceratops were alive. And we know that their environment was kind of like a coastal floodplain, a little bit like Florida or Louisiana today. So very different from the hot, dry prairies of today. But the Sustut Basin is on the other side of the mountains. And we know that the dinosaurs living there would have been living in a sort of a very narrow, small mountain valley with mountains and volcanoes on either side. That's a very different environment. So did the dinosaurs of the Sustut Basin, were they different species like Ferrosaurus? Do we have T-Rex or Triceratops living in British Columbia? And we really can't answer those questions without more exploration. So that's really fun. It's also really interesting because it might help us answer some questions questions about how dinosaur ecosystems were changing in the last 1 or 2 years before the asteroid impact that wiped out all dinosaurs except for birds. So there might be some really cool questions we can answer with more fossils from these beautiful British Columbia mountains and mountain plateaus. So I'm going to leave it there, and we'll take some questions at the end. Thanks so much for listening and joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Victoria. That was awesome. Again, what I love about these presentations is that for anyone tuning in from home, like highlighting that a scientist's role sometimes involves taking a helicopter an hour from the nearest town, which is, again, miles and miles, thousands of kilometers away from major cities, into the remote wilderness, traipsing over mountain, peaks that are covered in snow in the middle of August. Like, these are the coolest jobs in the world. Ken got a chance to talk about this a little bit too, and it's so exciting to get to share that with kids and for anyone who's tuning in from around Canada for this presentation. So thank you so much, Victoria. That was awesome. All right. So now we've gone from huge animals. We're going to go to the exact opposite. We went from huge things that were in the past to some really, really tiny things that are in the present. I'm going to turn it over to Claudia Copley. Thank you so much for joining us today. And if you want to try and bring up your presentation, we can keep the semi so far good tech issues rolling. Claudia, thank you so much for being here. And I can't wait to hear your chat.
All right. I'm going to give this a try. Let me see if I can get the slideshow to show. And just bear with me as with all of us. So
I have it all set if it's giving you trouble in any way.
So you don't see it?
No, it's not up just yet, but here's what I'll do. Sorry, I'll bring it up on one of my things, and then we'll have it all good to go. Oh, everything's going wrong for us again. all the fun.
Sorry.
No, not your fault at all. All good. I'm excited to share this with everybody. So
my browser blocked it. Okay, so have you got any?
It's thinking about it. It's taking its sweet time, but when it's up, it'll be up and we'll be good to go.
Okay, well, in the meantime, I'm working from home today, so I just want to say that I'm also on the Lekwungen and Wasanic people territory, but I'm not at the museum because that was indicated at the beginning with the territorial acknowledgement. I don't live so far that I'm in a different region. And you're right, we're about to talk about something completely different. When Victoria refers to something as small, she is really talking about a different scale than I am. So how are we doing for showing the show?
It's taking its sweet time. It was up and now it's going very slow. Everything can't go wrong is going wrong, but we should be good in like 10 seconds here. I swear for you, Claudia.
Okay.
Sorry for the trouble, guys. Oh dear. There we go. Okay, let's get that up. Perfect. You are good to go.
All right. There it is. So it's even in the title, Itsy Bitsy Spiders Living on the Mountaintop. Now, I'll just say that it isn't just me involved in this project. What we're trying to do is determine the different number and different species of spiders that live in British Columbia. And so we'll look at the next slide. So there are 3 people involved in this. You've met me. There's Rob Bennett in the center here. He did his graduate work on spiders, and he has mentored Darren. So these two both do all the identifications of all the spiders that we find. And of course, we all do the collections. So when we're out there, everybody's got this high-powered tool, which is called a pooter, but not officially. Officially, it's called an aspirator. And it's a tube that he does have in his mouth. And then you suck the spider or other small critters up with it. And it isn't going to go into his mouth. It's actually going to stop at a filter that's right near the end of the tube. So don't worry, nobody has to taste any spiders. I know that might freak a few people out, but it works very well. So I'll take the next slide. So when we started this project, there were, you could see here there are 656 spider species known from British Columbia. And I need to acknowledge the work of people in the 1970s. Researchers from the Canadian Museum of Nature went across Canada and including British Columbia, and they went all throughout and collected spiders, and the results of their work were a series of books that covered 12 of the different families of spiders that we have in British Columbia. But we actually have 41 species or families of spiders in British Columbia, so the books are incomplete, and they're quite out of date now. And the other thing about what they did was they worked the valley bottoms and set traps along the way called pitfall traps, and they headed north, and then on their way back they collected the traps and then they sorted them. So there was a real gap in our knowledge, and that was mountains. And so next slide. Our focus has been to go as many places as we can via our feet often. We really love a ski hill lift that's running in the summer. And we like a road to the top of a ski hill or a utility, some kind of telecommunication structures. But more recently, we've been partnering with botanists and taking the helicopter into the far reaches. So for anyone who loves British Columbia and knows all our mountains, we have Sleeping Beauty on Haida Gwaii. And in the middle, we have Cathedral Provincial Park. And then Darren's rocking those purple rad pants in Kootenay National Park. So, we've had to climb quite a lot. And now we have to go in a helicopter, which sounds exciting. And it is, because it's scary. Some people love it, but not all of us. So next slide. When we get to the top, no matter how we got there, we're looking for rocks. And just like Victoria, really. But we want to turn them over and look at what's underneath. And every one of those rocks has potential, new species, undescribed species, or, it's too big and you can't lift it, so you just have to wonder what's living under it. So we spend literally days flipping thousands of rocks, and you just flip as big as you can and as many as you can, and use your pooter to very carefully suck up the spiders you find. Next slide. So what have we found? Well, in 2020, we published a more recent checklist. So we're very close to 900 species so far, and we're very suspicious that we might find as many as 1,000 species of spider in British Columbia. And the different parts of the province have different levels of diversity, which is what we're starting to determine. And some places haven't been sampled enough. We need to spend more time in some areas of the province, and some of those places are very challenging to get to. Now this photo, I want everyone to look at that photo, because you can see that spider and then notice the finger, the tip of the finger for scale. And that is to make everyone who's terrified of the idea of 900 species of spiders, or as many as 1,000 in British Columbia, more than half of them are full grown when they're this big. So they really are itsy bitsy. And we definitely have a biological hotspot for spiders, especially in our mountains, as you can see by how the numbers have changed since the 2006 checklist. But there's other things going on too. Next slide. So we publish lists of the spiders we find, and we work at the provincial scale, but also our work feeds into national programs. Sometimes you can determine whether an animal is endangered, or at least know if it's rare by how many times you can find it. So there's status ranking. And then we've described new species. So we named a spider after the Ducati motorcycle, because it's such a fast spider, and the Ducati motorcycle is famous for being very fast. And while we're doing our work, the Barcode of Life does theirs, and every spider that is expertly identified by Rob and Darren has it gets shipped to Guelph, the University of Guelph. It has its photo taken, a leg taken off, its DNA analyzed, and then it comes back to us. So they benefit from our accurately identified library of spiders for their DNA library that they make available to researchers all over the world. So our specimens are available for that, and their DNA is as well. Next slide. While we're there, especially if we helicoptered there, and we're going to spend 3 days, we set traps and we try to collect every other thing we can find, so that in case no one does get back there to do the kind of surveying we're doing, there's a moment in time sample from that site. It's very difficult to get to some of them, and we don't want to waste any of our time there not collecting. We got to get as much of the biological diversity as possible into the museum collection so people can review it. So we use traditional net.
Claudia, you're frozen for a second. Let's get you back, hopefully, in a second. I think we can all agree while we're waiting for Claudia's feed to get back in that being a spider researcher is officially the best COVID workout of all time. You get like all the cardio in the legs from going up the mountain, and you get the arms and upper body from lifting up all the rocks. It's very exciting. I'm going to try it when I'm done. Let's see. Oh, we've lost Claudia for a minute. Well, that's a bummer. Hopefully we can get her back in a second. What we're going to do is wait for her for just a minute, and then we'll let her finish up her presentation if she's able to come back in a few minutes, and we can head to our next talk down the road if she can't make it back. Oh, Claudia's back. She just appeared. Hi, Claudia.
Hi. What is it? The solar storms? What's going on?
You know what? Anything? Listen, at this point, well, what else do we need? We need like phones ringing in the background, cats jumping on people's heads. This is very exciting. We were humming along there. You were right in the middle of telling us how you collect the spiders. You put out the traps, and so we can just bring that right back up, and you'll be good to go.
Okay.
Perfect. Go for it.
Okay. So we use a net to capture other insects, not spiders, other insects that are spiders are not insects, other flying critters. We also use the malaise trap. It's excellent for catching flying insects. And we use a beach sheet, which captures all kinds of things, including spiders. And then we set pan traps, which act like a big floral display and attract things that might think that it's a big flower. So maybe bees, but there aren't very many bees in the alpine. And then a lot of flies. Okay, next slide. So what I wanted to do now was highlight how the work feeds into other people's efforts. So we had a visiting researcher at the museum, and he found we had collected one of these really cute little cutie pies from Idaho Peak. He found it in the collection, and he was in the process of describing it. He knew he had found one in Alberta, and now he had a second one from Idaho Peak in British Columbia. And then when he sent me a photo of this little critter and said, "Hey, I found this in your collection. Isn't it awesome?" I said, "Yeah, and I have another one from this year." So that year in Graham Laurier, we had collected one. It's quite a distinctive little weevil. I know he looks like a little gonzo. So he's an undescribed species, just like that motorcycle spider that we described, unknown to science prior to the work we're doing. And next slide. So there are also some species that are extremely rare. I'll start with the moth, Euchalcia borealis. These three specimens that we collected in Graham Laurier were the third, fourth, and fifth specimens ever collected. So the two that are featured on the slide are in collections somewhere else in the world, and they don't belong to us. And they were the only two specimens of that moth known to exist. And now we've added three more. So still pretty rare moth, and a lot of excitement from moth people. You would not believe how excited they were. And then when we were in Kelowna for a BioBlitz, we collected caterpillars of what's known as the Kelowna tiger moth. And the caterpillar had never been described before. What they did was they kept them alive and reared them on the food that they were found on. And when they turned into adult moths, they had the first males of that species that were ever known. Plus, they now knew what the caterpillar looked like. So there's still a lot of work to be done. So here we go. Some endangered pollinators, always in the news. There's a number of bumblebees that are found in the alpine and still in places in the north where the habitat hasn't been so altered by people. Remember, these are really remote sites. And then some of the butterflies that we're finding are also blue or red listed, depending on the species. So the yellow dotted alpine is a red listed species, and the mead sulfur, which is pictured here, is a blue listed species in British Columbia. Next slide. There are also all the things in the collections. Well, I'll start with the invertebrate gastropods. So the slugs and the snails, they're not very good travelers, as you can imagine. So when they're on the top of one mountaintop, they might not be anywhere else because they take a long time to get anywhere. And we do collect those, and that feeds into information that we provide to the province for endangered species statusing. And then the weird creature above the the snails is called a grilloblattid. That's an extremophile insect. They live in ultra cold habitats. In fact, if you were to let one warm up to warmer than 10 degrees Celsius, it would die. They love the cold, which is very unusual for insects. And they're a very cool critter because almost no entomologists even have seen them. And I think I may have found more than anybody else in British Columbia for sure. You just have to go really deep, and the colder it gets, the more likely you are to find a grilloblattid. Plus, all the other specimens in the collection, from all the work we're doing, everything ends up processed properly into the collection and is available for researchers for hundreds of years. So that's it. Oh, and the next slide, it shows some snow. So not like what Victoria experienced, but this is terrible insect collecting weather, except for grilloblattids. But everything else is really hidden, and all the spiders too. But so this was, you can really have snow in the alpine any month of the year, and it changes things quite a bit. All right, that's it. And I can take questions later. Sorry about getting kicked out.
No worries at all. Thank you so much for such a cool presentation. And by the way, we talked about moth people being excited. I think we've all seen those images of like the NASA engineers and the thing lands on Mars, they're all screaming. I think if your talk is any indication, you insect and arachnid people are probably much more. We should have a conference with you guys when like you find you see what happens. Put that on Facebook.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Claudia. We're going to dive back in with questions in a minute, but what we're going to do right now is, we talked at the beginning with that map of all the cool places that our researchers today have explored. We had all those ones in the mainland, but then there's some out in the sea out there, and I think we're going to be heading there for our next talk. So I'm going to bring in Heidi Gartner. Welcome in. Thank you so much for joining us. And tell us about all that you've gotten up to and share that awesome presentation. I'm excited to dive in.
Hi, I'm Heidi Gartner. I have shared my screen. I don't see it up.
Yeah, you're perfect. You're all set. It's up now. And then whenever you need the video, just let me know and I'll bring that up for you.
Right. Yeah, so I'm going to talk to you today about seamounts in partnership with Fisheries and Oceans Canada. So seamounts are exactly what they sound like. They are mountains that are underwater. To be classified as a seamount, they have to be at least 1,000 meters tall. Now, much like the other talks that we heard about today, these are usually in really remote areas, and there's still so much to discover and find about these things, these locations. It's a little bit different, though. We still have to go out and do lots of fun exploration to be able to study these places. But it's got that extra bonus of being underwater and deep. So if you think about it, when you go under to study in some of these mountains, it's pitch black. You've got this incredible pressure on top from all the weight of the ocean. Plus, often humans can't do it. It's so deep. You have to do it with robots. So one of the things that I like to compare this to is, the people studying these places are basically studying mountains at night with a headlamp on and probably with some sort of robot. So really unique habitats. And the people that lead this research on our coast are Fisheries and Oceans Canada. And I invited Dr. Charisse Dupree and Tammy Norgard to be with us today, but they couldn't be here in person, but they made this incredible video. So Jesse's going to share that now. Hopefully it works. Let's see. Oh, there's no sound right now, Jesse.
Sound in the test, but not in the actual thing. Let's see if we can get that sound working. Oh dear. And worst case, if the sound decides not to work for either of us, what we'll do is we'll make sure that everyone has access to the video after the fact, and I'll link it into the YouTube chat bar for everybody. But let's see if we can try that one more time with feeling.
Excited to join you
How about
today
now?
To speak about mountains under the sea. To get to the special mountains I'm going to speak to you about, we have to go offshore, leave the coastline behind us, and go far out to sea. And once we're out there, surrounded by the open ocean, we need to go down, deep down below the waves, into the dark abyss. Under kilometers of ocean lies a hidden mountain range. These are big mountains rising anywhere from 1 to 3 kilometers above the seafloor. This is the same size as the iconic Mount Baker, visible from Vancouver Island. And just like Mount Baker, these seamounts are actually ancient volcanoes. We are incredibly fortunate that we have so many mountains under the sea, and it's pretty unique to our part of the world. Our tectonically active coastline gives rise to these underwater volcanoes. the extruded lava creating massive mountains that rise above the sea floor. While the idea of volcanoes might bring to mind intense activity, explosions happening at the bottom of the ocean, that's not actually the case. These are ancient dormant volcanoes. In fact, things in the deep sea don't really change that fast, and it tends to shape the life that we find down there. Processes in the deep sea change on geological timescales, and the animals that live there are adapted to the slow way of life. The rocks created by the lava of the volcano is perfect habitat for cold water corals and sponges. Just like tropical coral reefs, cold water corals create habitats for other animals. They're important foundation species that shape the communities of animals we find on seamount. In a world where time is almost suspended, these corals only grow centimeters per year, and even the fish that live in them are very old. These rock-eyed rockfish can be over 200 years old. While the rock provides important habitat for animals that settle on the seafloor, the general shape of seamounts also promotes life. Seamounts can be thought of as ramps. When cold water is pushed up against the seamount, it rises to the shallows. This deep water is nutrient-rich, and when it reaches closer to the surface, it creates a whirlpool. This mixing promotes and concentrates life above the seamount. It creates something like a cloud of organic material above it. This organic material rains down as marine snow. This injection of nutrients and food into the deep sea promotes an abundance of life. This nutrient rain is what promotes places like Spongetopia, the city of glass sponges that we found on Explorer Seamount, Canada's largest underwater volcano. Even though it was a kilometer below the surface, enough food gets to Spongetopia to support the habitat-forming bugle sponges that grow there. These glass sponges are like an old-growth forest, and much like the corals, create important habitat for other animals to live in. Seamounts are so highly regarded for the biodiversity in the oceans that they promote that the United Nations and the Government of Canada considers them as vulnerable marine ecosystems and ecologically and biologically significant areas. The life they create doesn't stop on the sea floor. Seamounts benefit pelagic animals too. Whales, dolphins, seabirds, sharks, jellies, tuna, and other fish are all known frequent visitors to seamounts. The only record of bottlenose dolphins occurring in Canada was nearby some of our seamounts. One-of-a-kind footage of a salmon shark displaying a new behavior never before seen by scientists was captured on film while researchers were above a seamount. To study seamounts, Fisheries and Oceans Canada uses ships, submersibles, and the internet. We stream footage from the deep sea to the ship and from the ship to the world. We've had hundreds of thousands of people from around the world watch live as we explore these hidden mountain ranges and discover animals new to science. Some of our submersibles have robotic arms that we can use to collect animals. We collaborate with the Royal British Columbia Museum. Through its vast network of taxonomists, the museum is able to help us identify animals as well as catalog and store them. Through this partnership, the museum is able to catalog deep-sea animals as part of the biodiversity we find within British Columbia. It seems reasonable that there's small animals that live kilometers below the waves that are new to science. It's a little bit more unbelievable that there's entire mountain ranges down there that have gone undiscovered. But that's exactly what's happened. With advances in technology, in recent years, we've been able to map the deep sea like never before. 3 years ago, we knew about 23 underwater mountains off our coastline. Since then, we've discovered an additional 41 seamounts, bringing the total to 64 underwater mountains off British Columbia. Fisheries and Oceans Canada scientists are working with coastal First Nations to identify, document, and name these new seamounts. While located remotely offshore and hidden far below the waves, animals that live on seamounts are not beyond the reach of humans. Because of the slow pace of their world, these species have not had to adapt to quick changes. Therefore, these animals are vulnerable to rapid changes caused by humans. The major concerns when it comes to the conservation and protection of seamount ecosystems is bottom contact fishing, marine litter, including lost fishing gear, climate change impacts as the water that bathes the seamounts is losing oxygen and increasing in acidification, and the emerging industry of deep sea mining, which is targeting seamounts for their cobalt-rich crust. Cobalt is a material necessary for the batteries needed for electric cars and smartphones. the increase in the global demand of cobalt has created a situation where it is now feasible to mine the deep sea. To safeguard the newly discovered mountains and animals that live there, the Canadian government and coastal First Nations are creating large offshore marine protected areas. As climate change continues to alter conditions in the ocean, established marine protected areas are important tools for mitigating human impacts that are still in our control, ensuring the protection of underwater mountains and the wealth of life they support. Thank you for your attention, and thank you to all our partners.
So a lot of incredible work by our colleagues at Fisheries and Oceans Canada. I just wanted to just talk a little bit about their incredible discoveries. They talked about partnering with us, but I just wanted to share what that looks like. For example, on their expeditions, we're partners that are kind of like in a science chat, providing science advice. And it was amazing to me that video of that urchin. We don't have that, even a specimen from that family in the Royal BC Museum collection. It's so rare to get these deep sea animals. So I was able to chat online through this incredible technology, and within 10 minutes, they had collected a specimen for us. We also provide advice about how to properly preserve specimens. I just wanted to note, they talked about how old these cold water corals are, and they can be, hundreds of years old. So instead of taking the whole animal, they often just take a snip, and that still provides us with the information we need. And then we also provide taxonomic advice. So I have a broad understanding. We have research associates. For example, we had an echinoderm, or someone who studies like sea stars and their relatives, who identified things from the seamounts. Plus, we can also, we have a vast network. So for example, that urchin, I couldn't figure out what species it was. I emailed some experts in the thing. They couldn't agree. And so I had to mail that gigantic urchin actually down to California to be able to be ID'd. And then same with sometimes unique polychaetes. And talking about our research associates, we have an incredible resource in Dr. Henry Reiswig. He passed this year. He was a world-renowned glass sponge expert. And just to give you an insight to what he does, here's a picture of a glass sponge. Their actual body is made up of tiny pieces of glass. It's incredible. And what he does is he takes the little snippets, he looks at them under a microscope and looks at their general structure, and then he actually breaks up that structure and is able to identify the different beautiful shapes that make up these animals, and defines new species and describes the species. And from the seamounts, from 1 year, they collected, I think, 20 samples, and he got 8 new species to science. For example, able to show that these 2 beautiful ones on the bottom are different morphs of the same species, but again, it's a new species to science that's never been found before. And why Fisheries and Oceans also likes to partner with us is we have this incredible holdings behind the scenes that a lot of people don't know about, which is, basically a library of the biodiversity of BC over space and time. You're seeing the invertebrate collection there. And we safeguard it, we share it with the data with anyone who wants to know, we lend it for researchers, and we also share the information through our own website, and now through things such as the Global Biodiversity platform and Canadensis. So this is us on Canadensis and the Global Biodiversity Information Platform. So thank you very much for your time. I should be able to answer most of the questions, but I would like to acknowledge that this is largely the work of Fisheries and Oceans Canada, but it's an amazing thing to be partnered with. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Heidi. That was awesome. Charisse is watching in on YouTube too, so a big shout out to you, Charisse. And we've had her on the Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants program before. She's amazing, so it's always a pleasure to get to highlight the really cool stuff that Fisheries and Oceans Canada is doing as well. We've got a big whole series of programs coming with them in the next in the new year, so I'm excited about that as well. And so yeah, let's dive in with questions, guys. I've got some questions for all of you. We're at the 54-minute mark. I appreciate all of your time today, so thank you guys so much for such a really incredible series of stories on biodiversity and mountains, both under the sea and all across the province of BC. So Heidi, to kick us off, with the rover going down into the seamounts, there were lasers coming out of it. They're 2 green lasers. What is that about? We've already got cool underwater robots, but with lasers, it's even better. Tell us a little about it.
Yeah, can imagine it's really hard to have the context of space in when you're with a remotely operated vehicle and on habitat that's so like heterogeneous. Like there's rock boulders, there's these corals branching out, that sort of thing. So those layers are actually a set distance apart. They're usually 10 centimeters, and it helps give the researchers an idea of size. So for example, they can do a photo mosaic of something and they'll have those green lasers in it, and they'll be able to know how large that animal was, or how big that slope was. And it's really neat because that sort of information is really important for things like the glass sponges and cold water corals, which flow really slow, and yet they're 2 meters tall. If it's 2 meters tall, it's actually estimated to be at least 200 years old usually. So kind of that fun information comes from those two green lasers.
That is super cool. Well, thank you so much. And again, highlighting these ecosystems is incredible. We've had the chance to bring on divers, like sort of elite divers from around the world. And quite often the place that they enjoy diving the most is off British Columbia. We really do have one of the treasures of world biodiversity with really unique creatures off our coast, which we're really lucky for. And so that's my next question for you. And then Ken, I'm heading to you next. For people that want to experience these seamounts, how do they go about doing this? You show these elite large scale research vessels, and certainly a lot of the things far off the coast, you need that sort of hardware to be able to do. Is there any way that a citizen, just a regular person, can go and experience any aspect of this in their everyday life?
Yes, they can. Again, I'd like to put kudos out to my Fisheries and Oceans colleagues. They have been live streaming most of their dives. So there's not one happening right now, but if you pay attention to, for example, Nautilus Live, you can, Nautilus is usually doing deep sea research around the world, not just in BC waters, but you can get that experience of going under the water. Or you can check out Fisheries and Oceans websites, social medias, all that sort of thing to see which other live streams they're doing. I'd also like to point you towards their YouTube channel. They've made some videos of, like, say, highlights from certain seamounts you've been to, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Fantastic. And again, whether or not it's something as large scale as a seamount, at 10 years old, you can start on the path of becoming a scuba diver. And I think that anyone here who is a scuba diver would say that's one of the coolest things you can ever do in your life, especially if you're lucky enough to be on the coast of BC. So some really cool opportunities. And thanks to all the commentary on YouTube too from Sharice and from Liz. Thanks, guys. All right, Heidi, that was awesome. What I want to do now is take us back to Ken. We're going to go full circle back to the beginning of our presentation, but I really appreciate you sharing all your cool stories with us today. Thanks, Heidi. All right, Ken, so let's bring you back into the broadcast for a second. I want to talk about citizen science. You talked about the fact that these places are so remote, it's expensive to get out there, you know, research expeditions are few and far between. Could people help fill that role? People that actually live in these communities, could they go and not do as detailed science as you're able to, but help sort of guide the process of finding some of the cool things that you guys can go and then discover in more detail?
Yeah, certainly there is an awful lot of ground to cover. Yeah, we would ask that they contact us in advance and ask how to make proper collections if they're interested in sending them to us. And yeah, there's no shortage of mountains in British Columbia, and yeah, short answer is yes.
Yeah.
But contact us in advance, and we'd like to give proper instructions as to how to make good specimens, how to provide not only good specimens, but also the proper documentation so that they could be the most use.
Perfect. So that's really great. And it's something that, again, not many institutions allow for that sort of thing. So I'm really happy to hear that you guys do and would, you know, encourage that sort of support. My other question for you is, you know, in your experience going up to the mountains to chart these plants, to see things, have you noticed a difference in the distribution or species numbers go down as a result of maybe climate change or habitat loss, or anything that you can share with us?
Sure. So the nature of our work is to document what's there now, but we can see that there's changes. And so going back to where the location where Claudia captured those 3 moths, we were camped in a meadow there at tree line. All around us, there were trees about 1 meter tall, and there was no dead trees. So what that strongly indicates is that tree line is moving up the slope, and in say 50 to 70, maybe 100 years, those trees are going to grow closer and closer together, and the canopy will close, and so a totally different ecosystem will exist underneath. And actually on a nearby ridge where we got dropped off by a helicopter at 2,000 meters, there were trees 1 meter tall that were growing about 15 to 20 centimeters a year. So you project that kind of growth for years and years into the future, and there's a very good chance that the alpine will be diminished. And going back to the point I made earlier, that the elevation of tree line is determined by temperature. So as global temperatures rise, there's no reason to suspect that trees won't as well.
So, I mean, this is something that we're hearing in a lot of our programs, whether it's climate change, biodiversity. I mean, the fact that ecosystems are changing so much around the world, whether that changes disease distribution or animal distribution, in your case, plants. And I mean, I'm really glad we get a chance to highlight that story, because it's happening rather rapidly. And the more we can do immediately to help curb that sort of thing, I think the better we'll all be off. And it underscores the fact that it's so important to get out now and explore these ecosystems while they exist in their current state, so that whether we can, help protect them or get a sense of what we've lost in the future or get a sense of what's changed. And so kudos to you for all the amazing work that you're doing to help, keep us in doing that. That's fantastic. Ken, thank you so much for joining the presentation. Stick around. We'll make sure that everyone gets a chance to say a quick goodbye at the end of the presentation. But what I want to do now is go from the future of BC's habitats way back into the past. Claudia, I'm coming to you last. Victoria, I want to come back in and talk about this idea that there's so few dinosaur fossils in BC compared to, say, Alberta. Now, is this just a reflection of the fact that it hasn't been explored as much, or is there some sort of geological reason or paleontological reason why that would be the case?
Yeah, that's a great question. So up until probably about the last decade, there hadn't really been a lot of dinosaur bones found in the province, but we actually have a really good record of dinosaur footprints, especially up in the northeastern part of the province around Tumbler Ridge and sort of the Peace region of BC. So that's pretty cool, because dinosaur footprints are actually not super common in other places like Alberta, where we get lots of dinosaur bones. So some of it has to do with having rocks of the right age at the surface and the right type to have dinosaur bones. And I think the biggest challenge in British Columbia is just that so much of the province is mountains, and mountains bring all kinds of different rocks up to the surface. So some of the stuff is too old, like where we find the Burgess Shale, and some of the stuff is too young, like rocks that were just deposited by glaciers, say on Vancouver Island. So you have to hit that sweet spot of like the right age, the right type of rock. People have actually gone and looked there, and it's easy enough to get there. And I think one of the challenges with mountains is it's just very hard to get to them sometimes. In Alberta, it's still challenging, but we can drive up to a set of badlands on like an old ranch road and then go hike out. Whereas in British Columbia, I have to take like a bush plane or a helicopter just to get sort of close to the rocks. So there's just unique challenges wherever you go. And British Columbia, I think, maybe has a few more challenges than some other places.
And I think, it makes for a more epic story. Like, I took the bush plane and then I took the helicopter up to the mountains for my camp there. I mean, that's just a fun thing to be able to share with people. And I think that, again, it highlights how exciting this role is. It highlights how exciting science can be. And so always a great chance to hear your stories about all the paleontology work. I really appreciate you having you on today. So thank you so much. All right. I want to head to Claudia for two last questions to wrap us up. So Claudia, come on back in. We're going to talk spiders for a second. So my first question, and on behalf of kids everywhere and people everywhere, why spiders? Were you a kid and you were like, I love spiders, this is it? Or like slowly but surely did you get like worn down by someone and now you get what's going on?
Yeah, so when I was a kid, I loved insects, and I was scared of spiders. And then when I started working at the museum, my love of insects was serving me very well, and it was amazing because I'm the entomology collection manager. But we are also responsible for spiders in that collection, and a lot of the questions from the public were coming in all the time to me asking questions about spiders, and I had no capacity to answer those. So I got to know Rob Bennett because that's what he was most interested in, and he showed us the way. He first of all, that fear went away pretty quick, because as soon as you see somebody else holding a spider and showing it to you, and you realize that's not a dangerous animal, and I'm 100 times bigger than it, so I don't know why I was ever worried. And also just more information about them. They're fascinating. I still love entomology. I love entomology more than spiders, but the spider project is something that needed to be done. So it was a gap in our knowledge, and it was obviously something that was of interest to the general public too. It has spiders are like bats or snakes. Yep. People are afraid of them, but they have a fascination for them, so they ask a lot of questions. So it's a good fit.
So, I mean, you're just dripping with passion about this, and it's so fantastic to get to share these sort of stories because, I mean, lions and tigers and bears, oh my, people naturally have this affinity with them. The undergrowth is something that a lot of people never really explore themselves, and so I'm going to take the chance to say to all our students out there, maybe you won't be quite as passionate as Claudia and I are, but get out there, like explore, sift through the grass in your front or backyard. You'd be amazed at what you discover. There's so much life there. And I mean, if you're going out looking for big birds or mammals, they are few and far between, whereas literally 5 feet out your door, you will find dozens of species of amazing insect, arachnid, and more. Even your house, sometimes big scary centipedes. There's all sorts of really, really cool stuff. So thank you so much for sharing that enthusiasm with us today. My question on that, my final question, I guess, on the note of it being safe. When you're lifting up the rocks, do we have any poisonous spiders you need to watch out for, or anything you need to be wary of?
Well, you saw the picture of the average size of those spiders. So it wouldn't matter if they were the most toxic thing on earth. They can't do anything to you, but they aren't. The only venomous spider we have in British Columbia that is a danger, medically important, we'll just say, it's not a danger, it's not aggressive, it doesn't go out to get you, is the one everyone knows, and it's the black widow spider. So, and that species lives at low elevation in really hot, dry places, and not actually under rocks, under logs, on beaches, and in burrows, the openings of burrows in the Okanagan. You often see them sort of in the burrow entrance. And I'm not afraid of black widows either. I'm respectful of them because they have a venom that poses a danger to you if you're immunocompromised, very old, or very young. And even then, you will survive it. You'll just need medical attention. So I'm careful with them, but I'm not afraid of them.
Perfect.
They're not aggressive. They're defensive.
I couldn't have scripted that answer better if I tried. I mean, highlighting that to people, I think, is so important that if you respect animals, if you give them space, if you understand what the dangers or lack thereof might be, you'll just have a more engaging and enriching time in nature. So thank you for sharing all of that, Claudia. That was wonderful. Guys, I'm going to bring in everyone in a minute to say a quick goodbye, but I just want to say a huge thank you to the entire team at the Royal BC Museum personally. This has been a really, really fun presentation. We got to explore so much together. So I hope if you're tuning in at home live or after the fact, you're as inspired as I am by all these amazing stories and amazing people at the Royal BC Museum. I'd encourage you all to check out the Royal BC Museum's website right on the bottom of the screen now. Again, amazing resources, exhibits, all sorts of cool things. If you're on Vancouver Island in Victoria, go check it out. If you're not, fly there when it's safe to do so and see it in person because it's a really, really cool place with, again, some really amazing people. So I'm going to bring in all our speakers today. Kim, if you want to jump in the background, you're welcome in too. But Kim, Ken, Victoria, Heidi, and Claudia, come on in. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we'll say goodbye to everyone and have a wonderful rest of the day, guys.
Bye.